Zoom can live stream to YouTube. That's cool.
Mobile popped over this wireless battery bank for an unboxing. Let's check this thing out and see what we got inside. This thing is Mobile popped over this wireless battery bank for an unboxing. Let's check this thing out.
Huh, that's awesome.
This thing is
So do I? That's awesome. Do I? Oh, I'm gonna end this loop. Oh, I'm gonna end this loop. I'm gonna leave that there. All right, let's see. A couple more minutes. Who's here? We got 11 participants. I'm gonna leave that there. All right, let's see. A couple more minutes. Who's here? We got 11 participants. Somebody check to see if you can see this Google Live. Somebody check to see if you can see this Google. I'm going to paste a link there. I'm going to paste a link there. The YouTube live. Okay, what happens if I close it though? I don't know if I need to keep it open. Do I need to keep it open? The YouTube live. I'm going to close it, see if you can still see it. I don't know if I need to keep it open. All right, closed it. Can you still see it?
Yep, I can still see it, Professor.
All right, let's try it out. Let's see. Maybe it'll be recorded there. It would definitely be easier for me to publish these things instead of doing it in through Zoom. But we'll see. All right, let's see. Who we got? That's 7 participants. 19. 21. Okay, some folks are still joining. Let's give everybody a couple more minutes. All right, for those that are just joining now, we're going to get started on the on our 3rd week of our CS 4550 web development course for summer 1. I'm just going to go over what we've covered so far. The first week, certainly we did introduce the course, and so we did some of the easy stuff that we introduced, HTML, some CSS, probably some material that you were already familiar with. But I wanted to make sure we had a same base for everybody of what we needed to know to go forward with this course. And we then in the 2nd week we worked on introducing on how to make our applications dynamic, so we can dynamically render content using JavaScript, and we can interact with the user as they filled out a form, maybe do some validation, go out to a server and fetch some remote data and dynamically render the application. So the first week we did a lot of static content. 2nd week we made it dynamic using the very popular jQuery library. So we're going to continue forward in how is it that we dynamically render content, but we're going to introduce today in a technology that we're going to be using for the rest of the semester. We're going to use introduce a React.js today, and just like the jQuery introduced a very thin layer of abstraction on top of the browser JavaScript, right? We said that there were certain issues with using raw JavaScript, and jQuery added a very thin layer on top of the raw JavaScript, so that you didn't have to deal with some of the idiosyncrasies of various versions of JavaScript, that certain features might not be supported in some of the browsers. So to guarantee that we didn't have to deal with any of that, we used jQuery. One student is trying to join, maybe. Just let me check to see. What's the piano and the sound again? Okay. Yeah. So jQuery added a very thin layer of abstraction, right, that allowed us to implement our code at slightly higher level, so that we didn't have to code to the raw implementation of JavaScript. So today we're going to introduce another layer of abstraction, which is even more powerful than jQuery. That introduces the idea that we can break up an application into multiple components, right? Like small pieces of Legos that we should be able to put together and build more complex components, right? Up until we have enough components that we can build up maybe an entire web page or even an entire application. So that's what React.js does. React.js is one of several libraries and infrastructure and frameworks that introduce this idea of component technology, of being able to break up different features or different parts of the application or a web page into small modules that you can combine and build more complex modules. And so again, React.js is just one of them. There's plenty of other competing libraries and frameworks, such as Angular or Vue or Ember, Sail, Meteor. Just tons of them out there that are looking to implement this idea. But React.js seems to be one of the more popular libraries. It has a very shallow learning curve, very easy to pick up. And so yeah, that's what we're going to be using from now to the end of the semester. And also another component-based web applications. The other aspect that React.js is going to introduce is the idea of a single page application. Right now, when you build multiple different web pages, an application is made up of multiple web pages. And right now, the way you navigate from one page to the next, maybe from the home page to the profile to the login to the registration to different parts of the application, right now is using hyperlinks. And the way the implementation right now is to the browser unloads the old content and replaces it with new content. So we're going to abandon that model. And instead, we're going to implement a different way of navigation, and which is basically single page application. So where you basically load the application once in the index.html in the root document, and then you use JavaScript to dynamically load more content as you need it and replace it, right, and put it strategically, build the application dynamically and show the content as you click and interact with the application. We swap out content back and forth, to give you the illusion or give you the virtual implementation of web pages, of navigation. So we still want navigation. It's just that the implementation is going to be quite different. So yeah, so that's we're going to be using React.js today. We will introduce the third assignment, which is going to give us a chance to practice React.js. We're going to have the quiz number 2 tomorrow, which is going to be based off of JavaScript and jQuery that we covered last week. So the topic for tomorrow's quiz is JavaScript and jQuery. Also, at the end of this week on Thursday, we'll talk about prototype. We did build a small prototype using jQuery last Thursday, where we were interacting with a third-party API, with movies and so on and so forth. We're going to rebuild that same prototype, but using React.js. And again, feel free to use the prototype that we're going to be building later this week as a starting point, as a means for you to build your own application as an idea, as again a initial starting code that you can use to go on and build whatever you want to build. Okay. All right. With that said, any questions about last week or the assignment that's due tonight? Any concerns? A quick question: Do you still see anybody still see the? I'm streaming this on a YouTube. On YouTube. Anybody can see the link? I think there should be a slight delay from what I'm seeing here here in the Zoom and what's being streamed to YouTube. I just was wondering if it was still streaming it there.
I just checked the link. You can watch live, but it is behind a bit.
Behind. Okay, so it still works. Yeah, excellent. So I guess it'll be recorded there as well. Great, thank you.
I have a question. I was trying to hit the server yesterday, and it was giving me some errors.
Yeah, I saw on Piazza, and some of the screenshots that I was seeing was some folks were trying to hit the server from standalone web pages, meaning they were not running on the server per se on their local servers at localhost 8080. They were instead running from web pages that were standalone. And you might get errors from doing that. So remember not to try to, right? You should always be starting the server either from the command line using Java, jar, and the target, or from the IDE. You can run the demo application, and then once the server's running, you can navigate to the screen that you want to test and try it there. But never from the screen. Also, other errors that might be happening is that when you post content, if the data that you're sending is not what the server's expecting, for instance, if you post something or you put, it's expecting JSON. One common mistake that I see folks do is that they'll post something else. They'll post a string, right? That is a JSON string. And it'll fail, right? It'll say cores, it'll say something. If it doesn't match exactly what it's expecting, it will give you a course error or things like that. I did see that the server was flaky last night. It did crash a couple of times. I did restart it several times. So hopefully, again, hopefully it's still working right now. Yeah, it was a little bit on and off and intermittent. Perhaps with so many people hitting it at the same time, perhaps that's what it was.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
What exactly was the purpose of the model for not only this assignment but generally so far that we've worked with it?
Yeah. So so the model was optional, but sounded like an explosion nearby. So typically when we implement large applications, we try to break up the application into multiple pieces, right? That have very dedicated concerns or specialized in many different aspects of the application. So, for instance, the HTML part and the CSS right now play the role of interacting with the user, looking pretty and laying it out and being as informative and user-friendly as possible. Whereas we broke out the JavaScript, for instance, we did not embed the JavaScript inside of the HTML, even though we could have embedded the JavaScript inside of the HTML. That's considered to be bad practice. Instead, it's better practice to split it up into its own little JavaScript part, and the role of that JavaScript that we wrote was the role of the controller, and the role was to convert user events, a stream of events, into actionable items, right? To manipulate the data, to go fetch more data, and then dynamically render the content. So that was the controller. Another JavaScript that we wrote, it was the service that who had the specific role, even though it was written in the same JavaScript, it had its dedicated concern of interacting between the controller and the server, right? We called it the service, right? Another layer that we somewhat made it optional, that what might also be very important would be the data represented on the browser, on the client, the data that you're manipulating. Okay, and in the case of the previous assignment, the model, the data that you're representing in the that you're manipulating, it was users, right? A list or an array of users, and oftentimes is useful, although not necessarily all the time, to have a browser or a client representation of the data that you're manipulating. In this case, our data model was very simple. It was an array of user objects, okay? And what we did instead is kind of bypass that portion and just use the service to manipulate a model that was actually maintained remotely on a server. The server is the one who's maintaining the array of users, right? And it's providing us with endpoints to be able to put, update, to create, to post, to delete, to read, right? And do all the post, get, put, delete of a model that is being maintained remotely on a server. But it's often useful to maintain a copy or a cache version of that model to represent it locally on the client side. And these two models oftentimes are one and they look very, very similar to each other or actually identical. Sometimes not necessarily, right? Oftentimes the model that is being represented on the server side, oftentimes it's much more hierarchical. It's much more denormalized. It's maybe a grouping or a combination of multiple tables or collections that spread the data across multiple instances, right? But then on the client side, so on the server side, it makes sense to split it up. If you've seen databases in 3200, you might have learned that usually we want to normalize the data. Make sure that the data is not redundant. You don't have inconsistency, and usually you normalize it into multiple tables. And then you have to do a whole bunch of joins on the server, right, on the database to retrieve that data. Now that data, usually the concerns of the database is to have quick retrieval, quick read write to the database, and you split it up into multiple tables. Now the concern of the client actually is not the same concerns of the server. What the client wants is just the data, all ready to be rendered, right? And I want to iterate over it and quickly render on the screen. So the normalization on the client side is not necessary. So oftentimes the client side maintains a very flat version of the same data model, right? That is on the server. The server might be very hierarchical, very sparse, right? But then on the client side, you might maintain a different version of that model, which is very flat, right? You just want objects in an array of objects, right? So you can iterate quickly and render it quickly. So oftentimes the conversion between these two data models is the responsibility of the client, right? That flattens the model for rendering purposes, that it's optimized for rendering. We kind of skip that part since the data models was very simple, right? It was just an array of users. But certainly, oftentimes, if the data model is much more complex, then it is often a good idea to have a dedicated model on the client, right, that represents what it is that you're rendering. Sorry, that was a very, very roundabout way, an answer. I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right, so let's focus on today's topic. Let's see. So yeah, we're going to be talking about we'll be talking about React.js for the remainder of the semester. Today we're going to introduce the technology, but obviously we're not going to get a chance to talk all of it this week. But again, we're going to have, the next 4, 5, 6 weeks. We're going to be practicing React.js for the next month and a half or so. Okay. All right. So let's talk about React.js. All right. So as we have for the last couple of assignments, we use assignments in this course as a guide or as a means for practicing a new technology that we introduce. So today we're introducing React.js, and the assignment number 3 is going to give us a chance to practice, to introduce and talk about the different concepts of React.js. So let's talk about the assignments, and then we'll introduce technology that we're going to be using to be able to implement this assignment. So this assignment is called Single Page Application with React.js, and it's going to give us a chance to introduce the concept of single page applications, of implementing web applications in terms of reusable self-contained modules, right? We call components, right? That can, collaborate to build more complex components and eventually build an entire page and maybe even an entire application. We're going to use the React.js JavaScript library to build single page applications, and also we're going to introduce another library, that's going to allow us to implement navigation, because we're going to abandon the old way, the legacy way of navigating. We're no longer going to be using hyperlinks that offload an entire web page and replace it with a brand new web page. We're going to abandon that. We're not going to do that anymore. Instead, we're going to be using a mechanism that can strategically go fetch content, right, and then dynamically add it to the page as you interact and click, so that we virtually do navigation, but we never actually leave that index page that we first load. We're going to revisit some of the content that we had implemented in the first assignment. So in the first assignment, we had implemented the home page, the course manager that had a list of courses. We had implemented the course editor. So we're going to revisit that, and we're going to reuse all that HTML, all that CSS that we built on that first assignment. We're going to reuse all that, and we're going to wrap them inside of components. We're going to make components out of them, okay, with using React.js, and just add a couple of features. Unlike the first assignment where the list of courses was static, in this case now the list of courses is going to be dynamic. Okay, so just like we learned last week on how to edit a list of users, right? We can add a user, remove a user. So this week we're going to learn how to use React.js, right, to add courses, remove courses, edit courses, but using React.js. Last week we learned how to do it with jQuery, right, and with a list of users. Today, this week we're going to learn how to do edit a list of courses, but using React.js. We're going to be using the same server, generic server, to store our content. Last week we were storing, editing, updating, deleting users. This week we're going to be updating, deleting, creating new courses. Okay. So first of all, we're going to create a brand new project. We're going to create a React.js project using the Create React App tool. This is a tool that is provided by Facebook. React.js is a Facebook product, and so this tool allows us to create a boilerplate, ready to go, ready to run React.js application that has already been configured correctly. And then we're going to do all our work in there. We are going to create a service module, right? Just like we did for last week, for being able to communicate to a server to implement CRUD operations on users. We're going to do the same thing for courses this week, right? We're going to create a course service that is going to be able to talk to a server, right, on my generic server, that we're going to be able to create a course, find all courses, find a particular course, update a course, delete a course. Very much like we did for the users, right? We were able to create a user, find all users, find a particular user, and so on and so forth. We're going to do the same thing with creating all the CRUD operations, but for courses, okay? We are going to create a React.js course manager component, which is going to render a list of courses. Actually, it's going to render a set or an array of courses in two different ways. It's going to render it as a table, right? And we did a lot of work last week on how to, or 2 weeks ago, I guess, where we know how to render the list of courses as a table, right, in a tabular format. But this week, we're also going to do a grid representation of the same thing, right? It's going to render as a grid. And we're going to be able to practice on how to navigate, right, on how to show two different screens. To practice the navigation part, right, we're going to have a course table and a course grid, and we're going to navigate between the two. So we'll learn how to do that. Now, the course manager is going to display both of them at first, right? And we're going to be able to toggle between the two, right? And by hitting a button, right, the grid and table toggle is going to be able to allow us to show one or the other. Here's a rendering of what the course like. I have the stage on the left hand side. We have the input field at the top where you can create a new course. We have the plus sign, and so this one is a little more explicit from last week. And notice that it's showing the course manager in three different views, right? We have the portrait layout, right, where it's shown vertically, where all the columns have been removed except the title of the course and the last column showing some buttons and some controls. Then as the screen becomes a little bigger, we have kind of like the medium landscape where an additional column is added. You still have the titles on the left, you have the controls on the right, and you have another column, saying who the owner is in the center. And when you make it even bigger, right, notice that now you have 4 columns, right? We have the same title on the left, we have the owned on the center, and then the last modified as well. And then finally, all the way on the right, you have the control button on the right. Okay. So 3 different layouts. Okay, and we did cover. Certainly, you're welcome to use Bootstrap. Bootstrap has lots of classes that allow you to implement this behavior of hiding and showing different content. Also notice the title course manager is shown here on the left-hand side, but it's only shown when the screen has been completely made in a large landscape layout, right? But as it becomes smaller, it doesn't fit, right? So we're going to hide it, right, with a smaller layout. So that's one thing. The other thing, notice that we have icons. Okay, and we have icons for deleting a course. We have icons for editing a course. Also notice there's some highlight here. Now for editing a course, the course is going to normally won't render the actual buttons. Only when you click on a course, right? When you click on a course, then the buttons appear. Okay, so the buttons are not shown ever. I'm sorry, not ever. Only when you click on a course, then the buttons appear, and then you can either click on delete or click on the edit button. Okay, if you click on delete, then the course is removed. Optionally, if you want to show up a confirmation saying, are you sure you want to delete this course? Say yes, and then that's optional. If you want to do that, that'd be great, but it's not required. If you click on the delete I'm sorry, if you click on the edit on the pencil, then the row, the selected row changes into the following. The delete and the edit button and the pencil disappear, and they are replaced by a checkbox. Okay. Also, the text, right? The text is replaced with an input field, right? With an input field. Okay. So that this is going to allow you to edit the course title. So you can type in a new title and click on the checkbox, and when you click on checkbox, then it returns into goes back to looking like this, where you have now the new name or the new title for the course, and you have again the edit button and the delete button. Make sense? Clicking on another course unselects the previously selected course and instead selects the brand new course, right? So it's only highlighted when you click on it. Excellent. So that's and we're going to do that using React.js. All right, we're going to do that. Yeah, React.js. What else? So yeah, so that's the course table. We're going to call it the course table. And the course table is inside the course manager. So there could be a parent component that is going to have embedded the course table component inside of it. Inside of the course manager, you are also going to have a course grid. And a course grid is going to render the same information as the course table, but it's going to render it slightly different, right? It's going to use a different layout. Instead of rendering as a table, render as the field, but right, you're gonna have this grid, right? You're gonna have the same title of the course. You're gonna have the modified, right? You're gonna have these. I guess here you should also, if you click on it, it's not shown here, but when you select it, it should show the delete button and the pencil button. It's not shown here. And then when you click another one, then it unselects that one and it selects another one. And if you click on the pencil, then you can edit the title of the course. When you say in the checkbox, right? When you click on the checkbox, then you see the new title. Now these images here, presumably would be previews of the actual course material. We don't. No, that's too hard. We're not going to do that in this assignment. Instead, feel free to use either one of your images, an image that you might want to use, or maybe just one of the watermarks that Bootstrap has many placeholder images, or maybe an icon, a font awesome icon that blown up so it's much bigger. Okay. And you can toggle between the two. You can the icon. There's an icon that's going to allow us to toggle between showing this grid layout, or when you click on it, it's going to come back to this table layout. Okay, so here it is. If you click on the grid, it shows this grid, and if you click on this kind of like bullet list, if you click on that, it goes back to this over here. Never mind about this folder kind of looking folder icon. That's I stole this image from Google Docs, or Google Docs, I believe. Yes. All right, so that's the course grid and the course manager, the course table, and they are all worth about 20 points for the parent, 10 points for the course table, and 10 points for the course grid. All right. Also, we are suggesting that each one of these, right? Each one of these should be its own component, its own React component, right? So you should not build it inside of course grid. Course grid should be iterating over many course cards. So this is a course card, okay? And we'll be showing you how to do that using Bootstrap, okay? And these two, these rows, this should not be part of the course table. But the course table should be iterating over multiple rows, and then but each row, each one of these rows should be a separate component, okay, which we embed inside of the parent course table. So we are asking you to break it up into separate components, right? And so 10 points each. The course row and the course card, 10 points each. All right, so that's for the course manager. Now, in the course editor, if you remember, in the course editor, you had created something that looks like this, right? You have the modules on the left-hand side, you have the lessons on the top, and you have the topics down below, and the widgets were optional. You don't have to work on the widgets. Not even in this assignment either. You don't have to work on the widgets. That's optional. You can get started if you want. But for now, we're just going to learn how to break up one of these guys, a whole screen, right? We're going to break it up into multiple components, right? The components don't actually have to work, right? The components themselves can be static, right? So the content in here is static, right? Even though we have JavaScript and we have React.js and we could make this dynamic, that's way too much for one assignment, right? We're going to wait to make this dynamic in the next assignment. Right now, the content itself is static, but we're going to break up this big HTML that right now, if when you implement it in the first assignment, it probably is one large HTML. So what we're going to do there is that we're going to break up that one big HTML into several smaller components, React.js components, right? There will be one big course editor, which is going to be okay, so it's going to be in this what I call modulus component. It's going to have this content, right? So you're going to break it up in there. The list of lessons, we're also going to break that up. We're going to put it in a separate React.js component. It's going to be called the lesson tabs component, something like that. And the topics as well. The topics are going to be split up into a different component, also called the topic pills component. Okay. If you want to get started on the widgets, you're welcome to get started. It's not required for this assignment. But if you want to get started, down below here, it's going to be a list of widgets, right? Just like this is a list of modules, this is a list of lessons, and this is a list of topics. Well, down below, it's going to vertically render many different widgets, okay? This is an example of one of the widgets that we're going to be implementing, the heading widget. If you want to get started and play around with that, I mean, you're welcome to get started and explore that, but it's not required for this assignment. If you want, you can leave this whole thing down below here. You can leave it blank. That's totally fine. Yeah, so the course editor is the parent component, right, which is going to contain the modulus component on the left-hand side, is going to contain the lesson tabs on the right top side, is going to contain the topic pills component on the bottom right here, right below the the lesson tabs. Yeah, so for that, you get 20 points, right? So basically, it's reusing the same HTML and the same CSS that you had implemented in the first assignment. You take that, it's all static, right? And you just break it up into 4 different components. That's it, right? None of this actually has to work, right? It's all static, right? We're just learning and practicing how to break up a big page into smaller little components, self-contained components, right? All right, so a couple of naming conventions and best practices, right? Your component should follow this naming convention, right? It should be, for instance, course editor component. That's a good naming convention. Wherever possible, components should be stateless. We'll learn what that means in a minute. Only use stateful component when absolutely necessary, and that criteria, I'm going to leave it up to you, right? We're going to show you a couple of examples here. I'm going to start doing it myself and show you when would you use one or the other. We're going to perhaps start off as a stateless component, but then we'll need to migrate to a stateful component. and we'll see why would you do that or not. Also, containers, we'll also talk about what a React.js container is, but basically it will be the component that contains several other subcomponents, right? When you start building all these components, you end up with an application made up of a hierarchy of components. You have the root component containing several subcomponents, and each component then containing other subcomponents. So you create this hierarchical tree, right, where each node, right, is a component, and then you have at the bottom you have leaves, right, where you have components that don't contain other components, right? So you could end up with all these branches, right? Each one of them being a container of other subcomponents. Now, usually a container not only just contains other components, it also maintains some state information, right? The data that is being used to render dynamically the content, right? So a container that a component, a React component that maintains not only contains other components, but also maintains state and also maintains event handlers and whatnot. More or less the same role of the controller that we implemented in the previous assignment, right? Those are referred to as container components, right? Also services, we're gonna have a service, right, that's gonna be responsible for shuttling data back and forth between the courses. So we will certainly have a course service that's gonna be able to create courses, delete courses, update courses, find courses, right? So certainly we're looking for you to follow these best practices and naming conventions, okay? All right, as a deliverable, right? We're looking for you to deploy this and for your JS implementation and also for the application running on Heroku. Okay. All right. That's the assignment. This is due next Monday. And as always, whenever we are introducing a new technology, we're going to provide you with a lot of code and starting material that you can use for yourself and implement and continue and finish up on your own. So we'll be doing a lot of hand holding on how to break up components, right? How to navigate between components, how to maintain state, how to create event handlers, all using React.js, and you can use that for implementing your own assignment. All right. Right. Any questions about what we covered so far? All right, let's get started. All right, so this is the third week, which is now available on Blackboard, and I welcome you to read over the learning objectives for this week, and what a little bit of what we're going to be doing this week. We're going to be building the whiteboard product, right, and which is a online learning a tool, right, that rivals Blackboard. And we're going to create a brand new React.js application. Here's a to create a React application, you're going to have to install a couple things. And one of the things that you'll need to install first is Node.js, right? So you'll need to head over to Node.js. Node.js. And you're gonna get a link to install for whatever machine you have, right? If it's a Windows or Ubuntu, Linux, or whatever version of Linux, or if you have a Mac, right, you'll get a download link for your machine. You click on that, and it'll download a package that you can, either it's an MSI package for Windows or it's a PKG for Mac. It'll double click it, install it locally, follow the instructions, and what it'll do is that it'll add a bin directory on your machine that it'll have several executables. Okay, now those executables. In particular, there's going to be two executables in particular that we're going to be interested in, right? We're going to care about the Node.js executable and the Npm executable. Now, first of all, a little bit on what is Node.js. So Node.js is it's a JavaScript interpreter, right? Usually when we think about JavaScript, we usually think of the programming language for the web, right? We think these are programs that are running on a browser, right, that can dynamically edit content, right, remove content, interact with forms, play a couple movies, maybe do some validation, whatnot. But we usually think of JavaScript running on the browser. JavaScript is more than that, right? And Node.js really broadens the applicability of the JavaScript language. So what Node.js is just basically and simply is just a JavaScript interpreter, right? That allows you to run JavaScript applications right on your machine, locally on your machine, as opposed to running inside of a browser. Now, one might say, well, why would I want to do that, right? I mean, we get some limitations, no? When you run JavaScript on a browser, you have quite a few limitations, right? You certainly can do a lot of things with the user interface, right? You can interact with forms and buttons and the keyboard keystrokes. You can go fetch data and whatnot and render a fairly interesting user interface. But you have the limitations of, you don't really have a file system. You can't store anything on the file system. You can't read and write from the file system, right? You are limited on the access on the web to data. Right, you have to go out. You don't have a database, right? You have to go out to a server to fetch data, right? So you're relying on network communication, and that network communication usually it's somewhat restricted, right? By default, you might have encountered this weekend where you were getting coarse exceptions and whatnot, right? Because browsers by design limit the type of communication that JavaScript applications can do, right? To give a sense of security to folks who might otherwise disable JavaScript. For a while, folks were very, very concerned of JavaScript. It says, what do you mean? You're downloading JavaScript from some other server and you want it to run on my machine? That's very unsecure. It's made secure by the browser by limiting what that code can do, right? It cannot access your file system. It can't just go out and make a network connection anywhere. It's limited, okay? So there are limitations when you run JavaScript on a browser. But Node.js kind of compensates with all the negatives of JavaScript on the browser. Everything you cannot do on JavaScript on the browser, you can do with Node.js, right? Node.js, you're running on a machine, right? On a server, so you do have access to the file system, right? You have unfettered access to the network, right? Nobody's limiting on who you can connect to on the internet. You have access to a database, right? You have access to tons and tons of libraries that you can install. In open source. Well, you do that as well on the client as well. But there are limitations on Node.js on the server as well, right? Because you're running on a desktop, right? You're running from the command line. Well, you don't have buttons. You don't have input. You can't type information, right? There's no interaction with the user, right? So these two, JavaScript on the server and JavaScript on the client kind of compensate each other, right? One thing that one doesn't do, the other one does, right? You can provide the user interface using JavaScript running in a browser. You can have access to the file system network and databases by running JavaScript on the server. And they can communicate amongst themselves together using just plain old HTTP, okay? So we're going to be using a lot of Node.js going forward. Right now, we're going to be using Node.js mainly as a way to host our React.js applications, right? We're going to create a boilerplate React application, and when we run it, basically what we'll do is that it'll start up a Node.js server and is going to host our local React.js application. Also, we're going to be using the Npm tool, right? So the Npm tool is going to allow us, Npm tool is going to allow us to access, a huge library of open source modules and components that the open source community is sharing with everyone, right? And to be able to install those libraries locally on our machine, we're going to be using the Npm tool. Okay, so together with the Nodejs executable that allows us to run JavaScript on our servers, we're also going to have the Npm tool, which is going to allow us to install libraries. It's going to allow us to install components, build, test Node.js and React.js applications. Okay, so yeah, we're going to be using Npm quite a bit. So yeah, so the first thing you should do is head over to nodejs.org, download and install Node.js locally on your local machine. Okay, so once you have that, one of the first things you're going to do is use the Npm tool to install the Create React app application locally on your machine, right? So this is one of the components or libraries that is hosted on the npmjs.com repository. It's going to download and install it. So npm-g means global. I want to install this tool globally on my machine. So it's npm-g install create React app. Okay, and you can create a brand new application by using create React app, using web dev term. I'm suggesting here a naming convention of what you should name your applications. So I'm suggesting to start them all with web dev. The term might be summer 1, the year might be 2020, your username, client, and then React. Okay, so here this might be a useful name. Yeah, SF19 Alice client React. Actually, there's a better way of doing it, which is listed here. And I mean, that will work, what I just documented. But there's a new version of npm. It's called npx. Right? npx will not only run your package, right, the module that you want to install. Not only will it download and install it, but it also will run it right away. Right? It also makes sure that you're always using the very latest version of that module, right? When you install it, something like we did here in this documentation, you're now responsible to make sure that, to install new versions, keep track and making sure you have the latest version and whatnot. If you use instead npx and create React app like this, right, it'll make sure to always use the very latest, right, tool here. Okay, so we're going to be doing this today. And creating an initial application to see how it works. Okay. And actually, let's go on and do that. I'm just going to copy this and head over to a terminal. And let's see, where are we? All right, so let's go to web dev. And let's go to 20. let's see, we have CS 4550. And this is summer one. So let's go to summer one. There we go. So in summer one, you'll notice that we already had an application in there, which was it was a Java server that we implemented for the last couple of weeks. So right beside, right in the same directory, we're going to create another project. Okay, but this is going to be a React.js project. So we're going to do a create npx. Let's make that a little bigger. Okay, so this is I'm going to call it CS 4500. So CS 4500, SU 20 SU. So 2020 SU for summer one. Januzzi is not going to be a server. It's going to be a client application, and it's going to be a React application. Okay. So anyway, I'm just suggesting that you follow this naming convention. Let's do that. And so what's going to do, it's going to use the latest version of Create React App, right, to create a boilerplate a React.js application that it's ready to run, it's ready to compile, build, deploy, and so that's what we'll do so far, right? And that's downloading everything. Now these new libraries, you know, React.js, Angular, they use a much more modern version of JavaScript. Okay. React.js uses ES6, you know, ECMAScript version 6, and that introduces quite a bit of new syntax that make the JavaScript language much more terse, right, much more compact, right? And so we'll be introducing ECMA6 today, and we're going to refactor, rewrite a lot of things that we wrote in the last couple of weeks using you know, ECMA5. ES5, and we're going to rewrite them using ES6. Okay. All right, so we're done. It's done creating our React.js application. We do an ls. Notice that we have a brand new directory. There it is. Okay, so let's head over into that directory. So the client side, there we go. So inside that directory, we can run this brand new application by saying npm start. And so npm start, again, notice that we're using the tool npm that we should have downloaded with Node.js, which is one of the tools, right? So npm and Node is the ones we're going to be using quite often. So npm start is going to run a script that has already been configured to get this up and running. So if we click on that, it's going to compile and build and deploy the application on our local browser. So there it is. It's up and running. Notice that this is being hosted at localhost 3000, right? And there you go. This is our brand new React.js application. It's a boilerplate. It's ready to go. It's ready to be deployed. It has all the best practices and conventions on how this application should be built. All right, so let's open it up. We can open up this React.js application. Here's our Java application. Let's leave that for a minute. Let's head over and into this brand new application. We'll say open. And let's see, here's our Java. 2020, no, web dev 2020, 4550. Wait a minute, where are we? 2020, 4550, summer one, there we go, summer one. It's not showing it. Why are you not showing it? Are we not in the right directory? Summer one, yeah. Summer one, maybe, wait. Open.
Professor, I think mine says like missing start.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, no, I think it was the IDE. I'm sorry, what question?
I think for mine, when I run npm start, it said missing script start. It's an npm error.
we'll do that offline. Yeah, right now, if you could just follow along, and
Okay.
yeah, we could deal with some of these one-on-ones on one-on-one. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's open up our application we just built. Right. We'll say okay, and let's take a look at what's inside here. Right. So if we look at that, we have we have an IDE, right? That's for this IDE. So you should ignore that. Notice that it has a .getignore already configured, which is great, right? So you can create a repository, even though it did not create a repository for us, but it already has a getignore, which is perfect. Notice that it says to ignore this directory, node_modules, right? And indeed, we have a node_modules. If you open that up, you'll see that there's tons of stuff in there, okay? So what's in here is all the libraries that React.js needs, right? These are all open source libraries that React.js depends on, and they are all installed under node_modules. So this folder should never be added to source control, okay? That's why it adds node_modules as a ignore in the git ignore. Perfect. So if I ever go into your repositories on Git, I should never find a node_ folder in your Git repository. Okay. So these are just the local libraries that we need. Let's close that. We also have a public directory. So the public directory is where when Node.js runs, it looks for this directory, the public directory, right? It's like the web app directory in our Java server, right? And in there, notice that we have our index.html, okay? And now that index.html should be rendering all this content, the spinning image here, this link over here and whatnot. But when you open up the index.html, you'll notice that there's not a lot of content here. There's not a lot of content, right? We see just a couple of link, for favicons. We have another link over here. We have another link over here, but there's not a lot of content here. We have a title, and the only content that this page has is just this one div here. See this div? And the ID is root. Okay. So you might ask, well, where's all our content? Where is this image? Where's this image? Where is this link? Where's all this? Well, it's not here, right? What React.js is doing, right, and many of the other libraries and infrastructures, frameworks such as Angular and whatnot, what they do is that they all declare some root elements, right, that is at the top level of our HTML, and then we dynamically update that content by injecting content dynamically into that root element. Excuse me. Okay, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you. Okay, so the real content, right, which is going to dynamically inject the content in that index page, is inside of source, right? And this source is where we're going to spend most of our time. We're usually not going to touch this index.html file, right? The rest of the framework, the rest of the library depends on this ID and on this div having that particular ID. So don't touch it, okay? Don't rename it, don't mock with this HTML document, okay? Maybe what you could do is install a couple of libraries here. That would be okay. Maybe some Bootstrap you might put in here, or some CSS library that you found to make it prettier. That's fine. You can put it in there. But most of your work will be done under your source directory. So under your source directory, notice that you have an index.js. See that? This is the actual where the application actually starts, this index.js, which is the one responsible for eventually injecting the content into your index.html. This is the entry point of the JavaScript application. So if you open that up, okay, it's doing a couple things, right? It's using now a different kind of language here that we haven't seen before. Notice it's using this import, but this is JavaScript, Java, right? Or C# maybe, right? But when you come back, you notice that indeed it does have the .js extension. So yes, this is JavaScript. This is the new version of JavaScript, the ES6, that uses a lot of the more modern techniques of programming, right? For instance, it introduces full support for modules, right? And being able to export different content so that you can import the content explicitly, right? And so we're going to be doing that a lot. We're going to be creating self-contained JavaScript classes, and we're going to export some elements so that other folks can import it, right? So no longer are we going to have the problem of namespacing that we had with the raw JavaScript, right? In raw JavaScript, we would have to protect the namespace by self-containing using iffy statements, right? Functions that automatically execute it, right, to create a self-contained namespace, right? No longer do we need to do that. Here, all the any variable that I declare inside of a file, right, it's self-contained. It's not littering the global namespace, right? So which is great. You would have to explicitly export something and then import it somewhere else, right? Right. So a couple things here. We are importing the React.js library, right? So we're importing that. So most of the JavaScript that we're going to be writing from now on that is rendering content on the front end, right? They're always going to be doing this import React, right? The second thing here is that we're also importing a CSS file, right? This literally is like a link, right? But now it's much more modern, right? You're importing a file, which is pretty cool. We're also importing this React DOM. This React DOM, right, is going to be the glue between this high level, class component world, which is very, very up there and very abstract, right? Which is the JavaScript side, is going to map all that JavaScript world into the HTML, right? So notice what's happening here. React DOM is using a function called render, and that render function is rendering something here that looks kind of like HTML-ish, right? And then it's using this low-level JavaScript and grabbing an element whose ID from the document, this is the low-level DOM element, right? That has a reference to the DOM, right? It's finding an element by ID that has an ID of root. Remember who had the root? This index HTML. See that? Index HTML has the root. See that? Well, it's going to grab whatever content you have here and it's going to inject it into that root. See that? That's what render does. Render says, render this into the root. See that? So it's going to dynamically inject that content in there, right? And we already know how to do that, right? If we were using jQuery, we would be doing something similar, right? We would doing jQuery, grab me the DOM or grab me something by ID, and then we would say append, right? So you can imagine, you extrapolate that underneath, that's what's happening, okay? So React DOM.render is grabbing an element and injecting the content. So what is being injected? So for now, just ignore the React strict mode. Note what the actual content in here is this app here. See this app? So that app, okay, that looks like an HTML element. It says, I don't remember an HTML element called app, right? I have divs, I have UL, I have H1s, paragraph. There's no app HTML element. Well, that HTML element is really being imported from here. See that? It's being imported from presumably some file called app, and we are referencing it locally app, and then it's being treated as if it were an element. Okay, so let's look at what app is. If you open up app, you'll notice that app is just a function. It's just a function that returns something, right? What does it return? It returns this kind of like HTML content. It says, wait a minute, what is this? Right? You have kind of like JavaScript, and inside you have this HTML, kind of like this back and forth between JavaScript and HTML, and then JavaScript again, and then HTML. What is this? Well, this is a new technology that we're introducing today as part of our React.js introduction. It's called JSX. Okay, it's an extension of the JavaScript language that allows you to embed right? Lens that allows you to seamlessly go between the two worlds, right? That allows you to mix and match JavaScript and HTML. So for instance, here, this function app, right? The only thing that it does is that it returns whatever content you have in here. So so whatever the app function returns is being used to replace, right, this value. This app here is going to be an evaluation of the function app. So if we go in there, it's whatever this function returns. And it's returning this div. So what is this div? Well, this div looks like there's an image in there. There's some paragraph. There's a hyperlink. Ooh, where have we seen that? Ooh, it's this content over here. It's this image. See this image that's rotating? It's this image right here, IMG. See that? And this text over here, it happens to be this text right there. See that? So we found our content. There's our hyperlink. See this hyperlink? It's this hyperlink right there, this hyperlink. Okay, so this is the content that we are seeing. This app is kind of like the root of the application, right? Which is containing everything, okay? And so we can replace this with our own content. For instance, we can say, we can blow away the content in here, and we can say maybe h1 hello world. Okay, and when we do that, we come back, notice that indeed we have the hello world right there. And so we know that the app element is where we are going to add all our own content. Okay, everybody good? Everybody still with me?
A quick question, sir.
Yes.
I thought it was bad practice to write another language using another language.
Yes, indeed. And so what JSX has done, right? The reason we say it's a bad practice is that usually in up to this point, the way we do that is by doing concatenation, right, and doing a lot of escape characters and doing and so what JSX has done, it says, well, how can we make that not so bad? Right, and so, for instance, one of the bad parts of rendering one language with another language is that we have to have a way to delimit when are we using one language or the other, right? And usually when we do that, either using Java or using .NET or using servlets or using other mechanisms, is that we have to do a lot of concatenations, and concatenations are very error prone. Okay, it says, well, does this quote matches with that quote over there? Did I open and then close it? You have all this nesting. So what JSX has done is eliminated any necessity to do that. Okay, notice that here there's no need to concatenate anything, right? It is literally HTML. You get the same IDE validation that you would normally get of code completion and also closing and opening and closing tags that you would not get in a language that is generating another language. You don't get any of the validation. You don't get any of the error checking, any of that. But what JSX does is that it allows you to seamlessly go back and forth between the two languages. So yeah, so JSX promotes the embedding and mixing of the language. Question in the chat. Where does the document come from in line 11? Does it persist? Blah, blah, blah. Yes. So the document is a global variable that is available all the time. Once you are running this code on a browser, a document is the entry point to the DOM, right, to manipulate the rendering. What we're doing here is React.js, right, hides all that, right, creating this new mechanism of allowing you to embed JavaScript and Java and HTML, creating components, creating all this high level abstraction, right? But underneath, all this gets compiled down to document dot. Okay, all this high level abstraction, right, is just syntactic sugar, right, to eventually just doing document dot whatever, right. Here, the only place where we do need to go down to the raw JavaScript connection to the DOM and the browser is here. Only when there's the meeting of two worlds, right? The high level, React.js world and the low level JavaScript world of the browser, right? But once you do that connection, you can forget about the low level implementation and you can stay at the high level veneer layer that React.js provides. Yeah, document is available all the time, right? But it's not like you're gonna use it. You only use it here. Okay. All right, so let's start working here. All right, so let's do a couple things. How long do I have? We got 20 more minutes. All right, so let's start working and use the assignment that we were given to start implementing and playing around with some of what we need. Right, so we have an app here that has kind of our entry point, and it has this div, right? And this function returns basically whatever we want as our application. So let's start our application. Our application, we're going to call it whiteboard, right? So let's create a component that will be our root application, a root of the application that we're going to be building. Okay, so let's create our first component, right? So it's usually good practice when you create a component, right, to put them in a directory called components. And because we're going to be building lots of things, we're going to be creating containers, we're going to create services, we're going to create models, we're going to create a lot of things. So components are going to be our reusable, self-contained user interface components. Okay. So in there, we're going to create a brand new component. We'll call it whiteboard. Whiteboard. Yes. And yes, we want to add everything to our GitHub repository. Excellent. Okay, so our very first component. So let's create a very simple component. So first of all components are going to need to import the React class, right, from React. Right, so all components are going to need to do that. Once you have that, right, notice that we won't need React DOM. We don't need React DOM. You only need React DOM at the very tippy top in the index page, in the index.js, right? So that we can do the connection between the two worlds, right? The high level React world and the low level HTML world, right? And so we don't need React DOM. Okay, so here we can start creating our own component. And to create a component is you create it by creating a brand new class. So here's a class, and we're going to call it the whiteboard component. There it is, right? And the class, right? Whatever this class returns as a content is what this is going to be rendered as, right? So the whiteboard component, it's going to need to extend the React component class, right? So one class extends another class, right? So it is inheriting, right, which is pretty cool now, right? This new ES6 introduces a lot of the mechanisms of object-oriented programming that we're already familiar with in modern languages, right? Now you have it in JavaScript as well, okay? So yeah, we have a class, a brand new class that extends a React component, right? And whatever now that component that we're extending declares several hooks, several functions, right? And we need to override one of those functions. In particular, we need to override the render function, and the render function is what is going to be used as the mechanism for determining what is this component going to render, what content is going to render, and whatever the render function returns component renders, right? So return, right? In this return, we can now return something, right? We can say return an H1 and say we want to return whiteboard, right? So whiteboard, okay? That's it. Right? So what we need to be able to do is be able to refer to this class, okay, here in our app. Right? In our app, we need to reference it here so that it's rendered, right? Because whatever our app returns, right, that's what gets rendered at the top level. Okay, so let's do that. Now, to be able to import something, notice we need to be able to export what it is that we want other folks to import. Okay, so let's export it. So we can say export. Now, when you export, you need to be able to say, well, what namespace do you want to export to, right? Just like a package, you would do in Java or in C#, right? Remember, you can break up your namespaces into packages. Same thing here in JavaScript. You can do the same thing. For now, we're just going to use the default namespace. So export into the default namespace, right? And we're going to export the whiteboard like that. Okay. Right. So what this is saying is that you're going to import from somewhere else, and you can actually export a lot of things. You can export variables. You can export a whole bunch of functions. You can have lots of exports in here inside of this file, and whoever's importing it needs to say, well, I want to import certain things here and there, right? Now the default allows you to say that if you're exporting a whole bunch of things, you have to explicitly say what you want, right? But here by default, this is what is being exported by default, right? So you don't have to name them, right? So in app.js, what we can do is import our whiteboard. We can say import our whiteboard. We want to import whiteboard from. Notice my IDE already knows where my whiteboard is. It knows that it's in the same directory, in a directory called components, right? And in there, we have the whiteboard component in there. See that? Notice that it leaves out the JavaScript at the end. See that? That's kind of implied. It knows that it's a JavaScript, so you don't need to explicitly write it at the end. Once we have that, we can overwrite. We can throw away this. We can throw this away and just use whiteboard as a tag. See, as a brand new element. What this is going to do is going to call our render function. So this is going to call our render function. And whatever the render function returns, that's what's going to be rendered. So if we go back to our HTML, notice indeed we have a whiteboard, right, rendering there. See that? Excellent. So we have the beginning of components, and then components using other components, right? So we have the top level component is the app.js, right? This is a very common name, right? As a root element, and then it's a generic root element, and then we have our root element called whiteboard, which is specific to our application. Okay, everybody good? Let's see, is there a question in chat? Are you reloading the web page? I'm not reloading the web page. Okay, so when we did the npm start, what the npm start is runs a script, and that script is watching the folder, right, the source folder, and any file that changes in the source folder, what it does is that it recompiles our high-level React.js, JSX, ES6. It compiles all that down to a lower-level JavaScript version, right, that all browsers can understand, right, and it redeploys the application in our Node.js server, right, and also it automatically refreshes the browser, so it hooks with the browser and says, hey, that page, refresh it so that you see it immediately. So it's a nice thing because now you can have this side by side, right? I can have this next to my IDE, ID. Wait a minute. That's not it. Where's my ID? I think it's this one. I think it's this one. There we go. You can have them side by side, right? And as you edit your content here, and you change something, and you say save. When you save, immediately it gets compiled, and you see your changes right away in your browser, right? So you can do a lot of prototyping really quick. Okay. All right, excellent. So let's keep going. So our whiteboard is going to have a lot of components, right? It's going to have a course list, right? And the course list is going to contain two representations of a list of courses, one rendered as a table and one rendered as a grid. It's also going to have a course editor, right? So it's going to have a lot of things in there, right? That we want to be able to render at different times, right? So we might want to start creating some of those components, right? So let's do that. Let's create a couple of these components. So let's see, JavaScript. Let's create the course list. The course list component, right? And our source component, course list component is going to look very similar to what we had earlier. Let's make this smaller. Let's see. And here we have, again, same thing. We were going to import React, right? From React, there we go. We can do a class. I'm going to call it course list component. There it is. We're going to do, we're going to do a extends react.component. There we go. And we're going to do a render, which is going to have a return, right? That's going to return maybe an H1 that says maybe an H2. How's that? Maybe a little smaller. This is a H2, and this will be a course list. Okay, and we need to export. We need to export this. Now we can export it down here. You can say export default course list component, or we can also do it up here as well as part of one single line. But for now, let's do it like that. All right, let's go back to our whiteboard. So our whiteboard might want to contain our course list component. So how do we do that? Well, we need to import the course list component. So import our course list component. There it is. Notice that it knows that it's loading it from the same directory that we're in. And then we can include it here. Now you might want to do something like this, course list component. There we go. See that? Okay. Now it's complaining though. See, we're getting the compiling failed, right? Because the rule here is that return can't return more than one thing. It needs to return one single root element. And right now we have two elements that are siblings to each other. So how do we go about that? So what we can do here is group them together into one single root element, right? Maybe we can put we can wrap it inside of a div as a single element, and now it's going to be happy again. There we go, right? So now we have the whiteboard that is now loading the course list component down below, right? Again, we're breaking up the top level component, of a whiteboard and building many different little Lego pieces, right, that we can put together and build a much more complex element, right? What else we're going to have? Well, the course list component actually should be maybe have two pieces, right? It should have maybe the course grid elements, a component, and the course table component. Yes. So for instance, we might have here the we might have two JavaScript, one for the course table component. Did I misspell it? Component. Yeah, that's right. And so again, in here we might have we're going to have import React from React, and we're going to export in the default the following class called course list wait a minute, course list component, which is going to be extending the React dot component. There we go. And what is it going to return for now? Again, let's keep it simple, right? We're going to return just an H3 that is the course list. Okay. And again, if we go back to the course list component, we're going to try to embed it in here, right? Because the course list might contain two implementations, two renderings, right? Either the course table or the course grid, and we want to toggle between the two, right? So the course list can import the course grid, course table, right? So let's import it here. So import the course list, the course table, and we're going to append it here. Oh, but wait a minute, remember, right? We need to wrap it inside of a parent div so that it's not going to complain. So let's import now the course table. There we go. I save. Ooh, did I call it? Wait, what did I do? Oh, this is supposed to be course table. Oh no, did I call it? What? This is supposed to be course table. Course list component. Course list. And this is supposed to be course table. Oh, I called it differently. Okay, this is supposed to be course table. Course table. And this is course table. There we go. Okay, now it's working. And it's exporting it, and the course list, course table. There we go. Okay, all right, I misspelled it. Similarly, we could have the course grid. So let's do the course grid. The course grid is going to be very similar to the course component, the course table component, but I'm just going to do it again. Again, we're just practicing on how to break up different, one large element or application into small little pieces, right? So let's have, this would be a course grid component. And again, they all look the same at first, right? So import React from React. We're going to export this in the default package and the following class called course grid component, which is going to extend. Oops. It's going to extend the React.component, and it's going to render the following content. That for now it's just going to be H3 course grid. There we go. Right. So back in course list, we're going to import both of them. Import course grid. There we go, and we're going to put it right below it. Course grid. There we go. Right. We save that. There we go. We have the course list having both the course table and the course grid. See that? Obviously, we would need a mechanism to be able to toggle between the two. So you show one or you show the other. Okay. Maybe based off of some state information, right? Some state variable, right? So let's take a look at that. How would you do a state variable? Well, you can maintain a state variable here. You can declare a state variable. We maintain a local state variable. Oops, not there, sorry. Here at the top level, a state variable, state. Okay, and it needs to be called state, right? It's a standard name, right? The state variable maintains the state for the component, right? And so, for instance, you might say, you might have maybe a variable called layout, right? And the layout might have two values. The layout might be that it's either grid, right? So if it's grid, you show the grid, and if it's table, then you show the table, based on the state. Okay, so here you can embed and have JavaScript that looks very much like if statements, right? If layout is grid, then render 1. If the layout is table, then render the other. Okay. So we could do the following, right? We can have here an embedded JavaScript, right? We can embed it and say, so these here render and evaluate to something. Yes, the course table is evaluating it to this HTML, and the course grid is also evaluating to this, right? So you can say, you put this inside of a JavaScript value expression, put it inside of a JavaScript expression. Notice that it still renders, and the JavaScript expression is evaluating it to itself, just whatever this renders. Okay, but you can put it in, you can put it in a Boolean expression. You could say maybe true and course table, and course table evaluates to itself, which returns something that is not false. But if you say false and course table, then because this is an and, you need both sides to be true for the whole thing to evaluate to true. But since we are putting a false in front of it, false and anything is false, right? So it doesn't render, right? So we could put here an expression saying, if this dot state dot layout, right, is equal to table and the course table, then that renders the course table, right? So notice that it's not rendering, right? And so we can do the same thing here. We can say, we can put some logic here that if this dot state dot layout, is equal to grid and the right hand side. So the right hand side always returns returns something that is not false. Okay, so now I can control what gets rendered by changing the state here. I can change this to table. If I save that, notice that it renders table. Or if I change this to grid, this changes to grid. See that? Right? And I might have maybe a button. I might add a button that allows me to toggle between the two. Right? So for instance, if I have a button here, a button that shows maybe grid, and then another button that says table. Two buttons, right? And ideally what I'd like to be able to do is that when I click on one or the other, I would like to be able to show one or the other, right? So I could do here a button that calls a function. Well, maybe I could have a function here. I could say a function called, set layout, right? And it could be a function. And actually, I'm going to use the new and improved syntax for functions in ES6. We're no longer going to use the old function keyword, right? Instead, we're going to use the arrow syntax for declaring functions. So the arrow syntax is as follows: is the name of the function is equal to parentheses arrow and then curly brackets, right? This is identical to having written the following: function set layout, and then this, right? But we're no longer going to use this syntax, right? So instead, we're going to stick to the new and improved ES6 syntax. So layout here is going to receive a variable layout. And we'd like to be able to set the layout to one or the other, right? We'd like to be able to say something like this dot state dot layout is equal to layout, something like that. Okay, and we want to be able to call this either with this button or that button. So let's do that. You see on button, we can say on click. Right, we're going to call this dot set layout. We're going to call this is going to be a function that is going to handle our call. We're going to call this dot set layout. We're going to call grid.
Professor.
Yes.
Why don't you need to call set state? You just change the state like that.
I'm sorry, say again.
You don't need to call set state in like.
Yes, I will.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And similarly, we're going to do the same thing for table here. In the table, right, we can say set layout. I'm going to pass grid. Okay. All right, so let's try it out. Let's refresh. And we notice that we click on grid and table. Notice that it's not quite working, right? And the reason it's not working, as our colleague had mentioned, right? This here, the state variable that we're declaring over here, okay, is not a variable that we are supposed to manipulate ourselves directly, right? Instead, any time the component changes state, right? It should not be manipulating the state directly. Instead, it should be calling a function that is inherited from the components, right? From the component. So we inherit the render function, and we also inherit a function called set state, right? And that set state is what we notify the library that our state has changed and that we should re-render, right? We should run our rendering cycle again and re-update the user interface, right? So we're supposed to be doing this dot set state. See that? That's a function that we inherit. And in the set state, we provide a JSON object that says what is our brand new state. And we can say that our new state is that our layout is no longer going to be grid. It's whatever variable we are passing as an argument. And so we're not going to do that, right? And now let's try it out, right? So now notice that it's still not working. Wait, what? This set state layout, blah, 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 grid. Oh, this is supposed to be table. I hate computers. Okay, there it is, grid and table. See that? So now we are able to toggle between the two, right, and show one or the other. Actually, we could move this a little further and maybe put this button here in the table when we are showing the grid. Maybe show this button over here, but we need to wrap this inside of an outer div. Okay, and do the same thing here. We can wrap this in a div. And maybe put the button, the grid button here, and put it here. Now, notice that we're in the grid, we show table. When we're in the table, we show the grid. So we can toggle between the two. See that? We show one or the other. Anyway, I've run out of time. I'm going to push this into a new repository and send you all a link, right? So you can take a look and feel free to use all the code that I provide. All right. Excellent. Thank you. I need to run. I have another class right after this. All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye.